click that subscribe button and click the notification bell, and I promise to bring you all the spoops. Today I've got a special mystery box episode for you. Reach inside and let's see what kind of assorted scary stories we have for you today. Monsters, ghouls, and creeps are waiting, so let's dive in. These are a variety of 5 true scary stories. Don't forget, you can share your stories at darknessprevails.org. If I could ask you guys for a favor real quick, I'm trying to reach 1,000 reviews on my iTunes podcast. If you have a moment, please click the link in the description and leave a review. Thanks so much. Dogman in Georgia by Devil Dog 4200. I live in the southern portion of Georgia in the coastal plains, and I've grown up around paranormal phenomena. I've always believed that there are things in this world, including dogmen. However, I always just assumed that it would never happen around me, and I couldn't have been more wrong. The first encounter I had happened when I was 15. My older brother and I liked to walk the dirt road at night, just to feel scared, to feel a rush, if you want to call it that. Our driveway ends at a red clay dirt road, and directly across from it is thick forest, so we start our walk beginning at the end of the driveway. Then we turn left and walk toward the bridge nearby, where we hang out for about 10 minutes. There was a lot of wildlife moving about that night. Frogs, crickets, you name it. The usual critters you get around here. We then decided to walk back. However, the moment we stepped off of the bridge and onto the wet clay of the dirt road, I immediately felt eyes on me. I turned to look at my brother, who was looking just as spooked as I was. But we decided to keep walking. Before you reach the cliffs, there's another driveway that cuts through the back of the house. We were about 15 feet away from that drive when that sickening, dreadful feeling intensified. It was at that moment we noticed that everything had suddenly gone silent, as if a switch were turned off. We watched down the road and noticed 2 large, piercing yellow eyes staring right back at us. We froze. My brother kept a .45 caliber Kimber when we walked. Scared and jumpy, he suddenly took aim and fired. The eyes didn't even blink. They simply stayed for a moment before pulling away and disappearing into the brush. Only a few seconds later, we heard a loud rustling sound. Then a massive silhouette jumped from one cliff to the other across the road. We were horrified because that jump was over 35 feet across. We were sure now we had to get out of there. We ran down the driveway and locked every window and door once we made it inside the house. It was the first time I'd ever been scared for my life, yet sadly, I didn't know that it would not be the last. The second encounter happened a year later. I had recently gotten my license and my first truck, a 1994 Nissan pickup. I was driving down the road from my girlfriend's house around 10:30 that night. There was no moon in the sky, so it was black as coal out. As I traveled down the road, I soon spotted a large black bulk on the side of the road. I slowed to 30 miles an hour to inspect what this thing was and to possibly move it from the road to prevent an accident. Once I made it to within 10 feet of the shape, it turned, and whatever it was bolted right into the woods at an ungodly speed. The entire time, I couldn't even see any more than a black blur. I stopped the vehicle to collect myself, thinking we shouldn't have bears in this part of Georgia, and they don't move that fast. I continued my drive home in confusion and a little bit afraid. I couldn't comprehend what I had seen. 15 minutes of steady driving later, I felt something extremely familiar. My stomach turned, and goosebumps covered my body. It was that sensation of being watched. I traveled 1/4 of a mile before the feeling of being watched turned into a feeling of being chased. At that same moment, I felt my truck jerk as if a big buck had run into the rear passenger side. Following the collision of whatever was there, I heard scratching on metal. Then there was what felt like something jumping onto the bed of my truck. Panicking, I floored it, but that was a bad idea. Something in the bed of my truck let out a deep and guttural growl and began scratching and clawing at the back glass. I was so scared. I remember thinking that this was it. This would be where I perish. I was nearing a sharp turn that then leaves 1.5 miles to my house. I took the curve way too fast when the creature jumped out of my truck. I thought to myself, it's gone. Just get home and get inside, and you'll be okay. Then came an ear-piercing howl to the right of my truck, and what I saw took my breath away. Running 60 miles per hour next to me was this huge dog-like thing. It was running on all fours and was nearly as tall as the truck. It just kept running next to me while keeping eye contact with those piercing yellow eyes like burning coals. As I neared my driveway, I lost sight of the creature. My parents were outside on the porch to feed our 2 cats and a German Shepherd. When I pulled in and walked past to get inside, they stopped me and asked, "What's wrong?" It was clearly visible that something had happened to me. I just told them I saw a panther or something of the like. Then I went to my room quietly and locked the door. Later that night, I couldn't sleep, and I swear I heard something outside. I got up and looked out my window, of which is 25 feet up. In my yard, next to my truck, was the creature I saw earlier that had been chasing me. It was sniffing the truck as if searching for something. Searching for me, perhaps. I gasped. It then perked up and rose up on 2 legs and looked right at me. I could now get a better look at it. It had thick, powerful legs like a wolf, and the body of a weightlifter with human-shaped hands. It was covered in thick black fur with a head like a wolf, and huge teeth snarling from inside its maw. I lay in my bed and waited for morning, listening to this thing sniffing around outside. I listened to it growl, howl, and throw things around underneath my window. When daylight finally came, my dad came into my room and asked me to come outside. He led me to the truck and, irritated, asked me what had happened. He showed me the huge dent in the side and the scratches all over it, on the fender well, in the bed, and on the back glass. I didn't know what to say to him. I didn't want to sound like a lunatic, so I just said a tree fell over and landed on it. My dad was suspicious, but went along with my story. He didn't question it, despite how stupid it sounded. Just because you don't hear about things happening in your area, it doesn't necessarily mean that you won't be the first one to survive or not survive something horrific. The Man Under the Lamppost by LeaveMeAlone. When I was 13 years old, on the cusp of turning 14, I was home alone for the night. It was January of 2010 in rural northwest Indiana. My mom was turning 40, and my dad took her to Chicago for the night to celebrate with a few friends, while my brother stayed at our grandparents' house. But I had opted to stay home because I was at that age that I wanted to prove that I was responsible enough to care for myself. My parents begrudgingly said yes, but only so that I could take care of our 2 dogs, Luke and Charlotte, for the night. They all left that afternoon, but not until I was given an extensive list of chores and reminders, such as phone numbers and my grandparents' address. In big bold letters at the bottom right corner were the words, "Lock the doors." I remember the excitement I felt after watching their car pull out of the driveway and eventually disappear over the horizon. Immediately after, I ran back into the house, locked all the doors, and ran into the living room to watch TV with the dogs. A few hours went by, and through the window I could see the sun setting over the field out front. I decided it would be the perfect time to walk the dogs out back. I leashed them both up and wandered into the backyard, waiting for them to relieve themselves. We walked out to the woods behind the house, and I let them sniff things for a while. The sun was starting to set now, and it was starting to feel chilly out. Both of my dogs had suddenly begun focusing on a single spot and would not stop smelling that one area in particular. I gently tugged on the leashes, causing both of their faces to look up. I started walking back to the house, but the dogs were not moving. I yanked a little harder this time, but they still refused to budge. They were both fixated on the woods. Charlotte began to growl quietly, which was out of character for her. Usually, she's afraid of anything bigger than her head, but she suddenly seemed much more brave. Luke followed in this behavior as well. The growling started to become snarling, and they both were tugging on their leashes and barking rapidly. I was able to drag them back to the house on account of them being smaller dogs. It wasn't uncommon to see deer in the area, so I assumed that they spotted one moving and wanted to go after it. I ignored it and went inside, walking back into the living room. I took one last look outside the window. The sun had disappeared and was just barely able to see snow falling onto the ground under the nearby lamppost. About an hour passed by when I heard the dogs barking at the window. It was in the same angry demeanor as before. I told them to be quiet because I was trying to watch some cartoons. I couldn't hear a thing over them barking like that. I reluctantly got off the couch to see whatever it was they were barking at. As I made my way to the window, they had both ran away from it. I scanned the front yard to see whatever they were looking at. What could possibly make them so upset? I searched back and forth until I noticed something just outside the light from the lamppost. After about 3 seconds of looking at it, it moved to the side into the darkness. I jumped backward at the sight and sharply gasped. My dogs began to go wild again. Although I was a bit scared, my curiosity got the better of me, and I returned to the window, scanning the yard once more. My eyes left the lamppost, traveled down the stretch of road, and returned to a sight that made me scream. There was a man standing under the light, hands hidden behind his back. His face and torso were covered by shadows, but his body was outlined in light. He had short, dark gray hair, a black coat, jeans, and black boots. He was also quite tall, despite having his back hunched over, being definitely over 6 feet. I stood there for a second, looking at the strange man, trying to understand the situation I was in. The nearest house to us was almost a mile away, and there was no car in sight. Before I could ponder where he came from any further, I had a gut-wrenching realization. The man was looking back at me. I backed up, but he started walking toward the house, walking out of the light. I quickly closed the blinds and grabbed both of my dogs along with the phone. I ran to my bedroom, locking the door behind me and closing all of the blinds in there as well. Using the phone, I dialed my grandparents' number, but there was no answer. Then I called my dad's cell phone and still no answer. It was then that someone began to ram against the front door, not knock or bang against it. No, they were ramming their whole body weight against it, trying to break in. I frantically dialed 911 as my heart was throbbing in my chest. A woman's voice answered, saying, "911, what's your emergency?" I told the woman that I was home alone, that a man was trying to break in. The banging kept getting louder and louder until I heard metal clanging. After giving the lady my address, she told me that it would be about 5 minutes before the police would arrive. I tried to not scream as I realized I had just heard the doorknob hitting the ground. It had fallen off, but the man was still banging against the door. Somehow it had not opened yet. I had to hold both of my dogs' mouths shut to keep them from barking and giving us away. It seemed like hours before the banging went quiet. The next sound I could hear was the faint sound of sirens. The police were almost here. It wasn't long before I heard knocking at the door, followed by a man announcing that he was an officer responding to a call. Relieved, I let the officers inside through the back door because the front was busted but still locked shut. The cops eventually got in contact with my parents and grandparents, who all rushed over as soon as they heard the news. The cops determined that the man had beaten on and around the doorknob with a hammer, leaving dents all over. There was enough snow on the ground to clearly define the footprints of the man who had run into the woods. There, the police found a small shelter built with branches from about 300 feet away from where I had walked the dogs earlier. They also found a knife and evidence of a set of footprints leading further out, deeper into those woods. Unfortunately, the woods get thick enough where no snow had reached the ground, and so the footprints eventually disappeared. They haven't caught the man yet. We later moved out of that house, and not once have we ever received any updates from the police. He's out there, somewhere, and I'm sure he's watching someone. Something in the Field by Mad Dog 43. I was out hunting coyotes on my farm on a cloudy Saturday morning. There was no real noise around me. The squirrels were especially silent, as they usually ratted me out, but that morning was just quiet. I decided to start the rabbit call and wait for a while until a coyote came out. I had my Scar 17 across my lap as I sat under a tree. After about 10 or so minutes, I ended up dozing off. I woke up about 20 minutes later to the sound of a dog barking. I looked out in front of me. There, I saw a coyote looking back into the woods as it ran across the field. All I could do was watch, because it was nearly flying. It was running so fast, and I mean I couldn't even tell if its feet were even touching the ground. I decided to get on the back side of the tree and look around it, because I figured the coyote had seen me and was alerting another one that I was there. I peered through the scope and watched the tree line until something peculiar caught my eye. There was another animal out there, this one much different than anything I've seen before. It appeared to be a large, black, malnourished creature of some sort. I put the crosshairs right over it, and it kind of dipped behind a tree, then looked right at me from the other side. It was like it knew exactly where I was. I waited a second as I was frozen in fear. I flipped it off of safety, and I was ready to fire. the creature walked out and towards me. By then, my heart was pounding so hard that I could see the scope swaying with each palpitation. I took a deep breath and fired one round. Now, anyone who knows their weapons, the Scar 17 fires a 308 caliber round, which is no slacker when it comes to power. I know I hit the thing right square in the chest. I know I did, because I have more than decent aim, and I saw what looked like dust fly off of it. But the animal didn't budge at all. I tried again, but the thing still didn't move. This time I put the crosshairs right over its face, which appeared to be snarling at me. I fired another 2 rounds right on top of each other. It moved its head a little bit, but still didn't seem to even flinch from it. It was then that I knew that I had to leave. I picked up the rifle and ran to the top of the hill as fast as I could, practically throwing myself into the truck. I then drove down the driveway pushing about 50. I hastily locked the gate and drove home in a sheer panic. Out of fear that I might see that thing again, I haven't gone back there. I do my hunting elsewhere these days, but no matter where I go, there's a looming sense of dread in the back of my mind. I'm just that afraid that I could see it again one day. The Man with the Bag by Silverwolf69. In Thanksgiving of 2015, I was spending time with my girlfriend and 2 friends of hers. We decided to have some fun by having a contest to see who would get their item first. I had to get hot dogs, while the 2 friends would, funnily enough, get peanut butter and jelly, while my girlfriend got a turkey. I picked up the hot dogs at a local Costco and was about to leave when I noticed a small black man. He was about my height and he was staring. I estimated him to be in his 50s. I walked over and asked him if there was something wrong. He hiked up his bag and said, "No issue, just be careful." I debated telling him off, but decided not to. After I left Costco, I saw him following me through the parking lot, carrying his bag. I asked him if he was following me, to which he replied, "Not following, just going to my BMW." I started to drive home and noticed his car was following mine. I stopped and so did he. I got out angrily and once more asked him, "You're stalking me, aren't you?" I saw he still had that bag. His reply was a calm, "Not stalking. My home is this way." I tried to ignore it. He eventually got off at a T intersection, and I started to feel better about it. But I couldn't help but think he had that bag extremely close to him at all times, as if he was ready to defend it with his life. I eventually made it back, but my girlfriend had already arrived back 10 minutes ago. I told her what happened, and the face she made in response, I'll never forget it. She said to me, "The exact same thing happened to me." She said a man carrying a bag made of paper extremely close to him was following her around and even followed her in a BMW car. I couldn't believe it. This was way more than coincidence. Something strange, something scary is going on here. Better yet, that very same night, my girlfriend and I both received a call. I recognized the voice immediately. It was the man that had been following me from Costco. He said, "Sorry, wrong number." The day after that, we saw a report on the news that the remains of 2 people had been found the previous day. The suspects were a very familiar black man and a white man who was familiar to my girlfriend, both of them around their 50s. The photos of the suspects matched who we had seen the previous day. I had never been more spooked in my life than in that very moment. We immediately called the cops, giving them all the information we could on the men we had encountered. Those men were later arrested in the week, and turns out the bags they had were full of money and belongings they had taken from their victims. What's scarier was the fact that in those bags there were more than the belongings to 2 people, but several, meaning there are other bodies that have yet to be found. That was the scariest experience I've ever had. Were we going to be next? The White Man and the Gray Dog. Another story by Silverwolf69. I was taking a trip with 11 friends, 12 of us total. Of the group, my best friend and I were the only firm believers in the supernatural. We stayed up that night until about midnight, telling ghost stories while eating marshmallows and hot dogs. At about 11:13 p.m., my eyes did something that they do often. They happened to focus on a random area. Basically, I was staring off into space. As I was telling a story about the Molly Maguires, I stopped mid-sentence when I saw a gray figure on what looked like 4 legs, standing still in a clearing about 100 feet away. Apparently, I had stopped telling the story because one of my friends said, "And then what?" I shook my head and apologized. "I lost my train of thought, I guess," I said. That night, I was sleeping deeply when a crack woke me up. I jolted up and checked the watch that I was wearing. It was 4:16 a.m. I was annoyed, but also a bit spooked. That sounded like someone was walking around in our campsite. I grabbed a fishing pole and slowly crawled out of the tent, careful not to wake my friend. Outside, I could see something faintly in the fleeting embers of the fire. Whatever it was tall, standing at about 6 feet, and was all white. And following at its heels was the same thing I'd seen earlier, a gray 4-legged creature. I swallowed a scream of alarm and quietly slid back into the tent. I woke up my friend and clamped his mouth shut. His glare told me that I better have a good reason for this. I whispered to him that I saw what I thought were ghosts in our campsite. His eyes immediately widened, as if to say, "Are you lying?" But I shook my head and whispered, "Just look for yourself." He peeked outside and stuck his head back in a few seconds later, and he was as pale as a bottle of milk. He asked in a whisper, "So what do we do?" I shrugged. I told him we should just stay in the tent. I then took a bottle of pepper spray, the kind for warding off bears, and unzipped the tent. I burst out and yelled, "Who's there?" but there was no response, except for the other 10 of us angrily sticking their heads out of their own tents. They looked annoyed and a bit shaken up. I had probably just scared them as much as I had been scared. The next morning, one of my friends, Harley, asked if we heard anything last night. I said that Grant and I had. Harley then told us he thought they were almost like footsteps, but soft, like the feet were only barely touching the ground. One of the girls with us, Quintella, said she heard the same thing. When I asked what time, he said, "I don't know, maybe around 1:20 a.m. When I asked Quintilla, she said around 3 a.m. We later asked the park ranger about it, as we had been sleeping next to the park. He said a lot of people aren't allowed in there because it's dangerous, and when I asked him what was dangerous exactly, he simply said, "Strange stuff." I do not know what strange stuff means or why he wouldn't say more, but now I'm curious and horrified, and I'm begging myself to not want to go back. But deep down, I do. Nothing quite matches the joy of opening something random, maybe a booster pack of magic cards, a grab bag of toys when you were younger, or even the dreaded loot box. We as people love random things. It must be the sense of surprise. As such, I hope you enjoyed these randomized stories full of spooks of every kind. If you want more episodes like this, let me know in the comments. And be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the episode. Don't forget that you can send your stories at darknessprevails.org. If you want to support my show, you can donate any amount at patreon.com/darknessprevails. And for as long as you do, you'll have access to ad-free MP3 downloads of these episodes, and you'll get your name in the credits of the videos. Or you could always just click that shop button below, or go to teespring.com/stores/darknessprevails and browse my merchandise. Thank you. Now then, here are my 5 favorite early comments from the previous episode about 5 real sightings of mountain monsters. Marine95 Bravo says, "Hello again. I saw the title and thought you were talking about my cousin Billy." Well, that's not nice. You make him sound like someone from The Hills Have Eyes. Well, if those hills do have eyes, I'm sure they're quite beautiful. Wallace the Tuna says, "Saw the preview thingy for this like 5 seconds before I got the notification for the actual video." Good job, YouTube. Why even make a community tab when you don't notify people in the first place? I'm still getting people who don't get notified until like a week later. It's more than bizarre. Ozzy Lara says, "Great, a new video. This is better than candy." You know what else is better than candy? I keep it in my pants. My library card. It allows me to check out any book for educational purposes at any time, for as long as the library is open, of course. Big Pimp Pinch 07 says, "Your videos help me get through life. Thanks, Darkness. Seeing these videos help people is so humbling, and in that way, I hope darkness always prevails, especially if it means helping you overcome your darkness." And Jacob Toothman says, "Hello, Darkness. How are you? And what is your favorite non-horror movie?" Hello there, Jacob. I feel great. And my favorite non-horror movie is probably Lost in Translation. I'm a big sucker for unrequited love. Anyways, guys, thanks so much for tuning in to another Darkness Prevails episode. More scary stories are coming soon, so stay tuned. Until then, here are the credits to my amazing patrons who help to make everything more possible. Stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.